Whether you play in a room that looks like this, or the room you play in looks like this, your room could use a music director.
Wait. But how? How are you supposed to implement a music director if you don't have a full-time salary available? Well, I'm going to show you the 4 most important days for a music director and give you a list of absolute essentials for an MD. But for you to get the most out of this video, you need to start asking this question. Where is my crossover point? Whether you're full-time or part-time or volunteer or weekend warrior, it doesn't matter. You just need to find your organization's crossover point. For the last 6 years, I've been on staff at one of the largest churches in my city, 4 years as a campus worship leader, and the last 2 years as a full-time music director. And over this time, I've seen a lot of leaders hold back their organization because they're waiting for a full-time salary to open up to hire an MD. But that's the wrong way of looking at it. Really, you need to find your organization's unique crossover point. You know what that is. So I keep saying crossover point. In every full range speaker like this one, you've got an element that produces highs, an element that produces mids and lows. At some point, you have to establish at what frequency does this stop and this take over. And that's what you need to figure out within your organization. At what point does the MD begin to take on some of the responsibility? Establish a crossover point. There's a different crossover point between worship leader and music director in every organization. You could benefit from an MD this week as long as you establish what that crossover point is. Even if that means the worship leader is taking 95% and the MD only takes the last 5%, you've got to start somewhere. So that's a good thing to think about, but how should you use the rest of this video? Well, over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you what a full-time music director looks like in my context. It's up to you to look at the tasks and responsibilities that I've taken on and decide if there's any of those that you're willing to give up. Then you need to identify a trusted musician within your circle that you're willing to hand some of these things off to. And if you can find 2 or even 3 of these players, you're really setting yourself up for success in the future. Now, let's get to the good stuff. The first day, planning. Weeks in advance, I sit down with the other worship leaders on our staff and we talk through sets and songs and series. That's a lot of S's. We talk through songs that should be a reoccurring part of this series, probably because of their content, and then also brand new songs that we want to introduce. Even at this early stage, we start brainstorming our approach to these songs. That might mean different arrangements, chopping up the structure of the song. It might mean a song that's normally kind of stripped back, we add more instruments into, or a song that's normally full band, we strip back it a bit and just maybe have like a piano, vocal, acoustic, that sort of thing. We talk about service flow and who will be leading which songs. All of this is just to sort of brainstorm, get the ideas flowing. Not everything is set in stone at this point, but a lot of the ideas at least need to make it to paper. Now, it's important to note that all of this could be done by just one person, but I find that we get a lot better results from the collaboration. Day 2, programming. This is where I get into the nitty-gritty. I build out a session in Ableton Live and I really start drilling down on the details. Building out a session in Ableton, I know that we'll eventually use this as click and cues and any backing tracks for instruments that aren't present on stage. But in addition to that, I'm also using this as a testing ground for transitions or any sort of arrangement changes. This is a time for me to be creative, but it's also where the rubber meets the road. This is where I find out if the planning stage actually makes sense. Once I actually start moving things around, do these pieces fit together, or are we going to have to rearrange some things to make it work? Also during this stage, I'm taking notes for anything that I changed and putting those someplace where the other worship leaders and the band can see them. Day 3, rehearsal. At the rehearsal, the MD is leading the band through the songs. This goes without saying. But for us, the MD is also responsible for communicating anything out of the ordinary with the songs that we're playing that week. That might mean calling out a section where chords are a little bit hard to remember. They might communicate those details before we start playing the song, as well as during the song. Here's a couple rehearsal examples I want you to see. The first one, I'm calling out specific chords that flip back and forth, making sure that the whole team is aware of which chord we're going to for this part of the song.
Here's a turn. Going to the 6. 4.
So here's another example, and this one gets a little bit silly, but because our team is mostly comfortable with all diatonic songs, when we do introduce something that's not completely diatonic, it does stick out a bit. So I had talked about what those chords would be before we played the song, and then by the time we got to that part, I literally just had to call out, "It's gonna get spicy." But that's all it took, because I had already talked to the team and they knew that it was coming at some point in the song, and then I just had to call that section when we got to that particular bridge.
It's gonna get spicy. Here we go. Here's the next passing. Come on. To the 2. Drag it.
Now, I should also mention that at least for our church, we find value in incorporating volunteers in all capacities. So for me, that means training up other music directors to do what I do in a volunteer capacity, and that usually means all of the planning and programming I do, but then the actual services and the rehearsals can be run by a volunteer music director. And that's been really helpful so that I can have a few weeks off a year, but also so that if I need to worship lead, or if I need to play drums or play lead electric or something that I don't really want to also be music directing, I can hand that responsibility off to a trusted individual. Day 4, services. So service day is probably what most of you were thinking when you clicked on this video. What does a music director do during service? Well, all of the things that I've done in the previous days all make the service day so much easier. The band is already prepared. I'm still communicating things on the fly when that happens, but for the most part, we already know what the service is going to look like. Until a moment like this. Here's a moment that we didn't plan on, but it totally felt appropriate to extend one of the songs that we were doing. And this was me communicating to the person that was leading the song and putting it out there that I thought we needed to continue, or it felt like we needed to continue because of some of the body language and the energy that I was seeing from him. I felt like he wasn't really done with the song, and so I stepped in to facilitate extending that song a bit. But it's important to note that if he would have waved me off, I would have deferred to his judgment. We would have just gone on to the next song.
I don't think we're done, y'all. Let's end it big, and then we're gonna go into the down bridge.
3, 4.
Down bridge, going into a down bridge. Five. 6. 1/3. To the 4. 5. 6. 1/3. Swell big the 4, swell the 4.
Here's another moment that was sort of half planned on the day. One of our worship leaders came to me and said before we went back into the bridge, she wanted to share a scripture. So I said, okay, great. I'll communicate with the band and we'll just work it out on the fly. In that moment, she had kind of given me an expectation of where she thought that was going to go. And so I communicated with the band, and in the moment, it worked really well. I just had to pull back the reins a bit so that we didn't go straight into a big bridge while she was trying to talk.
4.
I was reading over Psalm 23 recently, and there's a line in it that says,
Interlude.
"I will fear
2,
no
Follow now.
3, 4.
And as I was pondering on that line, because that's something I struggle with, another verse came to mind. It says, "Perfect love casts out fear."
Low build,
Bridge.
low build
2,
bridge.
Only love
3,
is
Low build.
4.
Our Lord. We try to find freedom and comfort.
To the 6.
We try to find freedom in controlling situations, and it doesn't work. But what does work is Jesus and His name, and there's
4.
power in that. And when we are singing this, we believe it. So let's sing this together.
Build.
Back to the
Shout
1.
Jesus from the mountains.
bridge.
Come on, hits!
3, 4.
So that's a good chunk of what I do, but believe it or not, there's more. But this video has to end at some point. So the last thing I want to go over is the qualifications for a music director. And I think there's 3 of them that stick out to me. The first one, humility. Humility is so important. You do not want to give this position to anybody that's super full of themselves. More than likely, they'll just boss people around, act like they know everything, and run people off of your team. The second thing is somebody who is relational. This can be a hard position for introverts because if you don't build relational equity, it's going to be harder to make corrections with the team, to call out things when you hear somebody playing something wrong, or you hear somebody playing something distracting or too busy or something that's fighting. If you don't have that relational equity, it's going to be so much harder to communicate changes that need to be made for the sake of the team. I think the time just before and just after a rehearsal can be so huge for a music director because those are the moments that you're building relational equity. It also helps the MD because you need to see that person not just as a musician in need of correction or direction, but as a person. And you don't get that without being relational in those type of moments. Lastly, an MD needs to be confident. Confidence is so important because people will be looking to you for all of the answers. But that doesn't mean you have to have all of the answers. It just means that you have to be the type of person who will get answers when asked. Try this one at your next rehearsal. I don't know, but I'll find out. That's why humility and confidence for a music director go hand in hand. You need to be humble enough to admit when you make a mistake, not just owning the mistakes that you make, but fixing the things that you got wrong. If you hesitate and wait to make a call, more than likely you already missed your cue. A music director needs to be confident because they're the one communicating direction for a song, for a section, whatever it is. You need to know where you're going, and that comes from preparation. Regardless of the size of your ministry, you can benefit from having a music director. It's just a question of how much responsibility are you willing to or able to hand off at this point. That's it for now. Don't forget to like and sub. I'll see you in the next one.
Blah, 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 blah.
Is this falling? I don't think it is. That was pretty good.
Ha.